I used to believe California was untouchable. Endless freeways, cities glowing all night, people convinced earthquakes were just part of life. Then one night, I got the alert I never thought I'd see. Leave California now. This is not a drill. No more false alarms. No more soothing words on TV. Just me, my phone vibrating, and a cold shiver down my spine. I stood at my window watching the city tremble, realizing everything familiar was about to vanish. This is the story I survived to tell. I'm sharing this because no one warned me in time, and maybe you'll listen before it's too late. Welcome to Chilling Secrets, the channel where we uncover the most gripping, terrifying true-style stories from the edge of disaster. If you want to feel the chill of real survival tales and uncover the hidden truths behind the headlines, hit subscribe and turn on notifications now. Tonight, I'm taking you inside the hours before California fell apart. The signs everyone ignored, the panic no one showed on TV, and the moment when running became the only option. I remember the first time the lights flickered. It was just a thin pulse in the walls, the kind of hiccup you get in summer when the grid strains under too many air conditioners. But it was winter, cool and steady, and nothing should have been overloading the system. The second flicker came a few days later, longer this time, and by the third I could feel a tremor in my gut every time the bulbs dimmed. I work with electricity for a living. Power lines and switchboards have been my bread and butter for years. And yet, in my own apartment, I couldn't explain why the lights were acting like a nervous heartbeat. I told myself it was nothing, just maintenance, but the gnawing sense of something bigger lurking beneath the surface wouldn't let go. It wasn't just the power. The sidewalks began to split in places they never split before. At first they were hairline cracks, the kind you might step over without noticing, but they widened fast, jagged like lightning frozen into concrete. One morning I nearly tripped over a fresh fissure running from my building to the curb. A city worker had placed orange cones around it, and waved off my questions with a casual, "Minor soil erosion." But his eyes darted like a man who knew more than he could say. I'd seen sinkholes in Florida years ago, and the lines in our streets had the same hungry look, as if the ground was testing its own seams. The media didn't help. One channel aired an interview with a wild-haired geologist who claimed the microquakes we were experiencing were unprecedented in recorded history. He spoke with the flat urgency of someone who's spent too long being ignored. Another scientist interrupted him on live TV, laughing off the warnings as overblown and reminding everyone that California sits on fault lines and always has. They debated until the segment ended and the anchors switched back to celebrity gossip as if none of it mattered. My friends shrugged. More earthquake porn, they called it. But something about that first scientist's face stayed with me, the way his mouth tightened when he spoke, the colorless edge in his voice. He looked like a man trying to warn a city already lost. Meanwhile, my sister Hannah called from Arizona almost every night. She's a nurse, good at reading symptoms, and she'd started treating California like a patient in triage. She'd text photos of sinkholes near Phoenix, reports of strange military convoys moving west, rumors of water tables shifting in ways no one could explain. "Get out," she told me bluntly. "Just for a weekend. Come stay with me." I'd laugh and promise to think about it, but underneath the banter I felt her fear climbing into me. Since our parents retired to Phoenix, she had slipped into a protective role, younger but steadier, as if she could sense the tremor in my voice even when I denied it. Her warnings didn't sound like paranoia. They sounded like a countdown. What unsettled me most was the military. At first it was just the occasional helicopter, dark green and unmarked, sliding low across the skyline. Then came the convoys of trucks, olive drab and anonymous, parking near freeway entrances and talking quietly to local police. I'd roll down my window and catch glimpses of maps spread across car hoods, men and women pointing to them with gloved hands. It was coordinated, deliberate, and completely unreported. If the news mentioned anything at all, it was routine exercises, but nothing about the faces of the soldiers I drove past, faces tight with unease, as if they'd been told to stand in place while something enormous moved beneath them. Each small detail on its own might have been forgettable. A flicker, a crack, a low-flying helicopter. but together they built a pattern like static in my bones. The city I'd always thought of as permanent was coming apart seam by seam, and I was the only one who seemed to notice the stitching unravel. The scientists argued on television, the city workers put out cones, the soldiers drew circles on their maps, and Hannah's voice on the phone grew more insistent. Looking back, I see it clearly. Those were the silent warnings, the moments before the storm when everything feels almost normal but not quite, when your instincts whisper the truth your mind refuses to accept. If I'd left then, maybe I'd have been far away when the real breaking began. Instead I stayed, watching the cracks widen, telling myself it was nothing, until it was everything. I woke the next morning to the kind of silence that isn't quiet at all but charged, like air before lightning. The power had gone out again, not just in my building but on the entire block. Without the hum of refrigerators or the soft electric hiss of streetlights, Los Angeles sounded older, more vulnerable, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Through the window I saw a patchwork skyline, towers glinting in sunlight, then blocks of dead glass where power had failed. The contrast was surreal, a checkerboard of light and shadow. I thought about Hannah's texts, about the geologist on TV. The cracks in the sidewalk outside had doubled overnight. The street looked like someone had dragged a claw across it while I slept. I tried to tell myself it was still manageable. Rolling blackouts, city maintenance. But the news confirmed only what I could see with my own eyes, entire neighborhoods dropping off the grid. The anchor smiled too brightly while reading the teleprompter, calling the outages temporary and routine. There was a single line about the Beverly Hills sinkhole. A water main break, they said, but the aerial footage showed half a house sliding into a pit wide enough to swallow a swimming pool. My father had worked in city planning his whole life. Water mains didn't make holes like that. He called later, his voice steady but taut. "They're watching the water table," he said. "Something's shifting. Don't believe the press releases." It wasn't a warning so much as an obituary for the idea of normal life. The military presence grew heavier that week. Helicopters began tracing lazy circles over downtown, dark green with no numbers or insignia. Convoys of trucks moved at night, headlights off, escorted by local police who blocked intersections without explanation. From my apartment balcony I saw a convoy slide onto the freeway just before dawn, dozens of vehicles melting into the horizon. The city didn't announce any of it. The news stuck to celebrity divorces and sports highlights. I learned to stop expecting truth from the screen and started trusting my own eyes instead. At street level, the texture of daily life frayed fast. The corner grocery where I bought coffee and cereal began to empty out. Shelves that had always been full were stripped bare by mid-morning, and a grim tension lingered in the checkout lines. One afternoon, as I reached for a case of bottled water, a man in his 50s leaned in and whispered that his daughter worked for the Department of Water and Power. "The system's failing everywhere," he said. "Pressure changes they can't account for. Like the ground's moving." Before I could ask anything else, the lights flickered and the crowd gasped in unison. It was a small hiccup in the grid, but it broke the fragile calm. People began grabbing armfuls of supplies, pushing carts as if they were lifeboats. The store's usual background music stopped mid-song, and for a moment the only sound was shuffling feet and harsh breathing. Driving became a gamble. The underpass where homeless camps had stood for months was suddenly vacant, tents and carts gone without a trace. Traffic signals stopped working at random, turning major intersections into four-way standoffs. One morning I watched a city bus shudder to a stop, its passengers spilling out and looking up at the sky as if waiting for an explanation. Cracks webbed the asphalt everywhere, shallow at first but spreading, spider-like, through parking lots and crosswalks. I began keeping my emergency backpack in the truck, never sure if I'd make it home the same way I'd left. The government's silence grew louder than any rumor. Official statements used the same words. Precautionary, temporary, no cause for alarm. But behind the scenes everyone was moving. I heard from a friend in the mayor's office that several city council members had taken sudden leave and left town. At the Hall of Records downtown, uniformed personnel carried out boxes of files into waiting trucks at dawn. I stood across the street watching them, pretending to check my phone while my heart hammered. They weren't archiving, they were evacuating. Whatever was coming wasn't just going to break streets and buildings. It was going to erase records, rewrite maps, and leave nothing for historians to argue over. Gas stations became flashpoints of desperation. Lines of cars stretched around corners as people filled their tanks and then filled extra cans. Arguments erupted when someone tried to cut in line or when a pump ran dry. More than once I saw fists fly, the thin veneer of patience cracking like the sidewalks. Police cruisers rolled slowly past but didn't intervene, their own trunks stacked with jerrycans. It struck me then that even the officers weren't planning to stay. They were fueling their own exit. At night the city grew feral. Without steady power the streetlights blinked off, leaving whole blocks in darkness broken only by the glow of candles in apartment windows. Sirens multiplied but never reached their destinations. Helicopters thumped overhead without spotlight or announcement. Even the air felt charged, the low-frequency hum of a city's nervous system misfiring. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake listening to the distant groan of stressed metal, the quiet drip of a leaking pipe somewhere in the walls, the sound of my neighbors moving furniture closer to their doors as barricades. The media continued its carnival of normalcy. One channel reported isolated power failures while showing B-roll from weeks earlier when the lights were still on. Another ran a segment about public overreaction, featuring a psychologist who called it collective earthquake anxiety. Yet my feed told a different story. Videos of dark neighborhoods, sinkholes swallowing intersections, military convoys on backroads. Tweets from people near the coast who claimed the ocean smelled wrong, metallic and heavy. Each post felt like a flare fired into a dark sky, ignored by the ships supposed to rescue us. I started recognizing the look in strangers' eyes. It was the look of people pretending they weren't packing their cars at night. The look of mothers buying bottled water for, just in case, of fathers topping up tanks they wouldn't otherwise fill until payday. Even Ryan, my friend who'd always rolled his eyes at disaster talk, began sending me texts late at night. "You seeing this? Doesn't feel right." We joked to mask it, but our jokes had gone thin and brittle. We were like animals before a storm, sensing the drop in air pressure, restless with no safe place to go. Then came the first true flash of panic. It wasn't an earthquake or an explosion but a rumor, an unverified post about a massive sinkhole opening near the freeway and swallowing a whole lane of traffic. Whether it was true didn't matter. Within hours the grocery store was stripped of food, the gas stations dry, and the streets jammed with people trying to head east. Cars idled in endless lines, their drivers staring at phone screens that showed only spinning load symbols. Cell networks hiccuped and calls dropped mid-sentence. A text from Hannah blinked onto my screen. "Arizona Emergency Management prepping shelters for displaced Californians. Please come now." It felt less like advice and more like an evacuation order with my name on it. By then, normal life had become a memory. Work shut down after the power grid went unstable. Frank, my foreman, sent everyone home with a voice I'd never heard from him before, tight, almost fearful. Businesses closed without notice. Downtown looked like a set after filming had wrapped, props left behind, extras gone home. The freeways, our arteries out of the city, were choking with cars or collapsing outright, and the side streets weren't better, jammed with abandoned vehicles whose batteries had died without warning. Streetlights flickered and died in sequence like a row of falling dominoes. Each block I drove felt older than the last, stripped of the digital skin that had made Los Angeles modern. The psychological shift was almost audible. People stopped asking, "What's happening?" and started asking, "Where can I run?" Neighbors who'd barely nodded hello for years were now exchanging evacuation routes. Mothers whispered about which gas stations still had diesel for their generators. Apartment windows glowed with the cold blue light of emergency apps tracking tremors and outages in real time. Everyone became a node in an underground network of rumor, speculation, and dread. I realized I was, too. The city had lost its grid but gained a pulse of fear. By the time the emergency alert finally came, Leave California now, this is not a drill. The real collapse had already happened inside us. The power grid was just wires and steel. What had truly gone dark was our shared belief in stability, the idea that someone in charge knew what to do. When the alert buzzed in my hand, people screamed, prayed, laughed hysterically. I saw a man clutch his children's hands and run across a red light, cars honking as he dragged them forward. The whole city tilted at once from denial into flight. Looking back, the collapse of everyday life wasn't one event, but a slow peeling away of the familiar until all that remained was survival. The blackouts and sinkholes tore at the infrastructure. The silence of the military and government hollowed out trust. And the public panic was just the final mask falling off, revealing what we'd all known for weeks but couldn't admit aloud. California wasn't going to hold. Our streets, our water, our homes, our very ground, all of it was slipping. And like everyone else, I was left to decide whether to keep pretending or to run before the floor opened beneath me. The alert hit like a thunderclap at 3 a.m. My phone vibrated so hard it rattled against the nightstand. I fumbled in the dark, half asleep, until the words burned into my eyes. Leave California now, this is not a drill. No more vague tremor warnings, no more bureaucratic euphemisms. This was blunt, final, unmistakable. Through the thin walls of my apartment I heard other phones going off, little chimes and buzzes like a flock of insects waking up all at once. Then came the sound of people moving, doors slamming, voices rising, feet pounding on stairwells. I pushed back the blinds. The city outside glowed like an emergency map, patches of darkness where the power grid had failed, streaks of headlights already streaming toward the east. Somewhere beyond downtown a red-orange light pulsed in the sky, maybe a fire, maybe something worse. I thought of Hannah's warnings, of my father's voice on the phone, and understood they'd been right all along. The cracks, the outages, the convoys, every sign I'd downplayed, it was all leading here. I threw clothes into a backpack, added the emergency kit I'd assembled in shame the night before, and ran down the stairs. The hallway smelled of panic, sweat, old wiring, the metallic tang of fear. Mrs. Alvarez from across the hall was on her knees stuffing cans into a duffel bag while her son shouted into a dead phone. I wanted to help but couldn't stop moving. The stairwell was jammed with people carrying children, dragging suitcases, clutching pets against their chests. When I reached the street, the sound hit me full force. Car horns, sirens, shouting, the deep groan of stressed concrete. I tried my truck first. It had been my plan all along. Drive east, follow the freeways, get out before the collapse. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. Dead battery, like dozens of other cars around me. People were slamming hoods, pounding steering wheels, abandoning vehicles right there in the middle of the road. Some sprinted off on foot. Others stood frozen, scanning the skyline for some invisible signal telling them which way to go. The freeways themselves were choking. From my vantage point on a small rise, I saw taillights stretching like a vein toward the horizon, then breaking where a section of elevated road had buckled and fallen. Cars were jammed bumper to bumper, drivers climbing out to run between lanes, children crying in the backs of SUVs. Beyond that, downtown was shimmering, literally rippling as if heat waves distorted the air. I blinked hard but the image didn't resolve, whole buildings flexing like soft metal, windows bursting outward, plumes of dust rising like ghosts. East was impossible. The arteries out of Los Angeles were clogged or gone. I turned west instead, toward the only chance left, the ocean. If the land was falling apart, maybe the water could carry me out. I started running, weaving between stalled cars, past people screaming into useless phones, past a man dragging a suitcase who tripped and didn't get back up. The ground shuddered underfoot, small tremors building into rolling waves. Cracks opened in the pavement ahead of me. I jumped one and nearly fell into another. The closer I got to the marina, the more the city blurred into disaster footage. Water mains had burst, sending geysers of brown water into the air. Fires burned unchecked where gas lines had ruptured. A city bus lay on its side, windows shattered, passengers crawling out like insects from a split shell. The air stank of burning plastic, diesel, and seawater. My lungs burned, but I kept moving. Just reach the boats, I told myself. Just reach the water. When I finally staggered into Marina del Rey, it looked like a battlefield. Hundreds of people crowded the docks, shoving, screaming, clutching at any vessel that floated. Yachts meant for leisurely weekends were overloaded with desperate families. Sailboats broke their moorings as people tried to board all at once. Gunshots cracked somewhere down the pier, a security guard firing into the air, trying to hold back the surge. People fell into the water and disappeared beneath the crush of bodies. I had never seen such naked survival, not even in disaster drills. Through the chaos, I spotted a small fishing boat near the end of a dock. 3 figures were untying its lines while a 4th wrestled with the engine. It wasn't luxurious, which probably explained why it wasn't swamped yet. I pushed toward it, elbows up, my backpack banging against my spine. "Please!" I shouted when I reached them. "Take me with you." The man at the tiller looked up, face gray with exhaustion, then gave a small nod. "Get in. Hurry." I jumped aboard as the last line came free. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared. We lurched away from the dock, weaving through debris and human bodies floating in oil-slick water. The woman beside me clutched a young boy to her chest, her eyes hollow. Another man sat with bloody hands, staring at nothing. None of us spoke as the city receded behind us. Even on the water, the earthquake found us. A vibration rose through the hull, deep and primal, as if the ocean itself was shuddering. I turned to look back and saw Los Angeles folding in on itself. Entire towers tilted and slid, freeways collapsing like ribbons, clouds of dust billowing up as the ground gave way. The skyline that had framed my whole adult life sank like a ship taking on water. The mother covered her son's eyes. The man at the helm pressed the throttle harder, muttering, "Don't look back." I couldn't obey. My eyes locked on the disappearing city, on the people still running along the crumbling coast, on the military helicopters heading north without slowing. I thought of Hannah's messages, of my father's warnings, of every chance I'd had to leave. Now all of it was behind a curtain of dust and falling steel. We kept pushing into open water until the waves smoothed beneath us, until the screams were faint and the skyline was a jagged shadow. I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. We'd escaped, but we'd also abandoned millions. Ahead lay uncertainty, dwindling fuel, a dangerous ocean, no destination. Behind us, California was gone. And in that moment, as the Pacific swelled beneath our small boat, I understood survival was only the first chapter of whatever story came next. You've heard my story, but now I want to hear yours. Imagine you're standing in the dark at 3 in the morning and your phone lights up with the same message. "Leave California now, this is not a drill." Outside, you hear sirens, people shouting, and the deep, low groan of the ground itself shifting under your feet. Do you run? Do you stay to protect someone you love? Do you trust the government's silence or your own instincts? Take a moment and put yourself in that moment. No script, no second take. Picture the flickering streetlights, the smell of dust and gasoline, the chaos on the docks as boats push off into open water. Where would you go? Who would you call first? Would you have an emergency bag ready or be forced to grab whatever you could carry? Share your thoughts below. Your comments might help someone else think ahead or see things differently. This channel, Chilling Secrets, isn't just about stories. It's about building a community that faces the unthinkable together. So tell me, in the moment of truth, what would you do? As the boat pushed farther from shore, I looked back one last time at the city that had raised me, loved me, and betrayed me all at once. Los Angeles was no longer a skyline of glass and steel but a sinking silhouette, fragments of light swallowed by a rising ocean. Everything I had thought permanent, streets, freeways, neighborhoods, the rhythm of everyday life, had vanished in hours. Survival had stripped away everything except the most basic instincts: breathe, move, endure. But survival isn't an ending, it's only the beginning. Out there on the water, with strangers who had become lifelines, I began to realize how thin the line between order and chaos really was. We had no guarantee of food or fuel, no map to guide us north, no certainty the coastline even existed beyond the haze. All we had was motion, a small boat, and the stubborn refusal to sink with the city behind us. If you've followed this story so far on Chilling Secrets, thank you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. In the upcoming video, we'll go beyond the coast, into the open Pacific where rumors of strange lights, abandoned ships, and an even deeper truth are waiting. Was California's collapse just the beginning? Did something else wake beneath the ocean while the land fell apart? The answers, and the next part of our journey, are coming soon. Stay safe, stay ready, and stay with Chilling Secrets, where the next wave of this story might change everything you think you know about survival.